Hello, my young constitutional scholars. It is round two of the Bill of Rights, and you've already kind of dug into the First Amendment. I hope you enjoyed our discussion on the possible scenarios about the First Amendment. Make sure you go back and review those five freedoms, the freedoms of course, religion, speech, press, petition, and assembly. But we're going to dig into the rest of the Bill of Rights. You looked at the First Amendment right there. In this in this part, it says Article One. We call them Amendment One. But we're going to go to Amendments 2 through 10. So you're not going to write down a ton of the actual words of the amendments because they're already in your notes because you have the amendments themselves. But I'm just going to try to explain them, and then we're going to have I think what you'll find to be an enjoyable discussion on Friday and Monday about these amendments. So let's get going with them, all right? Before we get started, though, remember our rights are not given in the Bill of Rights. They are, of course, protected in the Bill of Rights. Why do we have those rights? Fill it in right now. Say it because we're born and we're citizens of the United States. I'm sure you said that very good. Nice job. Also, bear with me. I've got a little bit of allergies. I'm sniffling a lot, so I apologize. Hey, we're taking some notes here on the Bill of Rights, Amendment 2 through 10 and 14, of course. You don't have to write down the amendments themselves because I put them on your notes. You should have noticed that right there. All right. But just in the space provided, write down any ideas and also, and any notes, anything that I might mention that resonates. And then also, we're going to use these notes in class. So I'm going to add to them, and we'll add some terminology too. If you look down here to check yourself again, do you understand? Kind of use that as sort of a self-assessment, or remember what I like to call it, formative assessment. How are you doing on this information? Are you getting it? Talk to your parents about it. This is good stuff, okay? But without further ado, let's get going with Amendments 2 through 10. The Second Amendment is one of the more controversial aspects of the Constitution. It's also the only amendment that has its purpose listed. If you think back to the time around the Constitutional Convention, they had just gotten out of the American Revolution. They knew the importance of having a militia. So they said a well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment, of course, is your right to bear arms. Now, because it says it shall not be infringed, that does not mean it is entirely protected. As you probably know, there are gun registration laws, there are licensing laws, there are background checks, and all those kind of things. So there are some limits to your right to bear arms. However, this continues to be one of the more controversial amendments or aspects to the entire Constitution, and one that we will see the Supreme Court rule on as they open their new session this year, just this week. Amendment 3 is basically an amendment that never comes up at all. It's about the Quartering Act, if you remember that from Mr. Markwald's class. It says that no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in somebody's home. There's never been a Supreme Court case about it. Some people think it really doesn't matter that much, but what's interesting to me is it says, "In no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered." What if it's a time of war? Could they knock on our door and say, "Hey, where's my dinner?" That I don't know, but it's one of those amendments that it's one of the aspects of the Constitution that some people think is a little archaic or old. But anyways, Amendment 3, no quartering of troops. The amendment continues with no warrants shall be issued but upon probable cause. And then it talks about how it has to describe the place that's going to be searched and the purpose for that search and what they're looking for. So, what this means basically is that the government cannot search your stuff, your house, whatever, and seize information or evidence or material without a warrant. It's got to be a reasonable search. They've got to, especially if it's your private property, they're going to have a warrant, and that warrant has to have probable cause. And if they do not have that probable cause, they can't use that information or that evidence against you. That's called the exclusionary rule. Now, if your parents are attorneys, they know this way better than I do. Come on, I'm just an eighth grade teacher. I tell jokes. It's what I do, right? And just kind of throw some knowledge at you. But the exclusionary rule is something you should know. An example would be that if the police broke into your house and found evidence that you committed a crime, they can't use that in the court of law. You'll see it on Law and Order all the time if you ever watch any of those shows. Those are great shows, okay? Now, that does not mean that you have complete privacy. This does talk about your right to privacy. But of course, there are limits. You have the limit to the right of privacy when you go onto an airplane. Your privacy is limited when you take your garbage out to the side of the road. You're kind of giving up that privacy. If you're one of those people that are walking around in the middle of the mall or whatever, in the middle of an open place, and you're talking real loud on your cell phone and you're talking to somebody, you kind of give up that right to privacy. So you have the right to privacy where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. That's how it goes. Where do you have the most reasonable expectation of privacy? In your home. Not as much in your car, and definitely not in your locker in school. But here's what's interesting. Think about your home and your car. What if it's a motor home? Ooh, interesting. Do they have to have a warrant to search a motorhome? These are good questions that you should possibly post on the board for your section when it comes to coming up with cool scenarios. But anyways, Fourth Amendment, no unreasonable search and seizure without a warrant. Roger that? Let's go to number 5. The Fifth Amendment deals with the rights of the accused, if you are accused of a crime, or if I'm accused of a crime. Now, think about it. They kind of do it in order. Fourth Amendment, that's how they get information about or evidence against you. They've got evidence against you, the government does. Now they're going to accuse you of a crime. You have rights if you are being accused of a crime. Number 1, you have the right to a grand jury. That means that a grand jury has to say that there's enough evidence against you to hold a trial. Then you'll have a trial jury. All right, that's a large jury. The government has to have enough evidence to prove that they can hold you on trial. You have the right to no double jeopardy. You cannot be tried twice for the same exact crime. No double jeopardy. So if you are charged with robbing somebody's house on a certain day at a certain time or whatever, and you're found not guilty by a jury, you can't be charged again for that same crime. Doesn't mean you can go out and rob houses, but it means that you can't be held in jeopardy twice for that same crime. You also, of course, you probably know this, you have the right to remain silent. That's called no self-incrimination. You know the whole thing, right? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. That is the right of the accused. That means that you do not have to testify against yourself. They can't beat a confession out of you. And also, if you say that I'm taking the Fifth Amendment, that I'm not going to talk about what I did, they can't use that against you in a court of law. So just keep that in mind. And then finally, you get due process of law. The government must follow the rules in your trial. So it's kind of like there's a rule book out there, all these things that we're talking about in the Bill of Rights right now, the government's got to follow those rules. If not, it could be a mistrial. These are to protect you if you are accused of a crime. So if you think about it, the Fourth Amendment, that's about evidence. The Fifth Amendment, you're accused of a crime. Now we go to the Sixth Amendment. What do you think it's about? Your trial rights. Now, as juveniles, you actually don't get the same kind of trial rights. You don't have a jury trial or anything like that. You get a bench trial, in part because you can't have a jury of your peers. But anyways, when you're an adult, these are your trial rights. And of course, if you have a relative, parent, or whatever that is an attorney, they know way more. Ask them if you're interested, because this is cool stuff. So let's take a look at these trial rights. First off, you have the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. Now, who defines speedy? Well, that's up to the courts, but it's got to be public. We don't want our trials to be done in secret, all right? And then also, it has to be an impartial jury. I will never be on a jury if you're your jury if you're accused of a crime. You're never going to be on my jury if I'm accused of a crime, okay? Because we cannot be impartial. That means we can't be unbiased. So that's been something that's had a couple of Supreme Court cases about it. Really kind of interesting cases. You can ask me. It'd be a good lunch conversation. Then, when you have that jury trial, you have to be told of your charges. They can't just say, oh, you're on trial and you got to guess. You need to be told of your charges. You have to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation. You get to confront or cross-examine the witnesses that the government will use in your case. It's not like the witnesses can just talk and you can't ask them questions, or your lawyer. And you get to bring witnesses for yourself. Now, I can't be on your jury, but I can be a witness. I could be a material witness, which means I know what happened. Like, I can say that, oh no, so-and-so could not have robbed that bank because he or she was in my third period class. Or I can be a character witness saying, oh no, so-and-so could not have robbed that bank because they're just really a good kid. All right, so I can be a witness, it's just not on your jury. Same thing, you can be a witness for me, but not on the. And then finally, you probably already know this, but you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you by the government. It's called a public defender. These trial rights are very important, and as you can see, we have a progression here. You got your evidence in the Fourth Amendment, you got your accusation in the Fifth Amendment, then we got our trial rights in the Sixth Amendment. The Seventh Amendment only applies to suits of common law. What that means is a lawsuit. That's when one person sues another person. Okay? So, if one person sues another person, or the government sues you, or whatever, a business sues you, or you sue a business, and the value of the controversy is $20 or more, then you get a jury trial. So, you get a jury trial if it's a lawsuit of $20 or more. That's pretty common now. I mean, if you sue somebody for $18, oh buddy, not a good move. Just swallow the $18 because your legal fees are going to be higher. So now we go to the Eighth Amendment, fines and punishment. It's kind of that progression. Fourth Amendment, finding evidence. Fifth Amendment, you're accused of a crime. Sixth Amendment and Seventh Amendment, there's a trial. Then we get to the Eighth Amendment. Well, if you're found guilty, fines and punishments. The first part of the Eighth Amendment says that there can be no excessive bail nor excessive fines. Now, that does not mean you are guaranteed to get bail. Bail is kind of that get out of jail so that you can, defend yourself. But bail is not a guarantee. It just can't be excessive. If you kind of get nailed for, I don't know, skateboarding up at Best Buy and they throw you in jail, which I don't know why they do, but they throw you in jail, they can't say your bail's $1 million. That would be excessive. And also, if you get found guilty of that for skateboarding up there, they can't fine you $1 million. That would be excessive. Then the second part of the amendment is that there can be no cruel and unusual punishments. Now, cruel and unusual, that is all up to the government. They determine what would be cruel and unusual. And I will tell you that the government, the federal court system, has never determined that this death penalty is cruel and unusual. They have said that it can only be administered for certain cases, typically a capital case or a case where somebody lost their life. They've limited the age to where the death penalty can be administered, but the death penalty has not been considered cruel and unusual. Okay? That's up to the courts. Remember, they interpret the law. They interpret what cruel and unusual means. The Ninth Amendment comes right out of the ratification battle between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. If you remember when we talked about that, one of the arguments that the Federalists said that why you didn't need a Bill of Rights is because if you list your rights, you actually limit your rights. So when James Madison wrote the Bill of Rights, and he had a little help, but when he mostly wrote the Bill of Rights, he basically put in the Ninth Amendment that just because we listed our rights doesn't mean we've limited our rights. We have more rights than those listed. The most important one that wasn't listed in the Bill of Rights that I think is kind of a big deal, the right to vote. Okay, so this is sort of like the implied rights clause for us as citizens. We have more rights than those listed. The 10th Amendment, we've actually already talked about. This is the amendment that establishes reserved powers. It basically says the power is not delegated to the state or the United States government by the Constitution, and that the ones that are not denied or prohibited to the states are reserved for the states and to the people. Reserved powers. Anything not given to the national government, the states get, which means that we get them. And that's what helps out with that great system of, come on, say it with me, federalism, right? The national government has their national powers. If it's not given to them, it's reserved for the states and the people because that government's closest to the people. There it is, my friends. There's your first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. Oh, they're good stuff. But wait, one more thing I want you to know about, and that's the 14th Amendment. I mentioned it in the first video about the First Amendment, but the 14th Amendment does a lot of stuff, and we'll talk about it in its historical context when we get to the years after the Civil War and Reconstruction. The 14th Amendment does so much. It actually establishes citizenship, and it makes sure that we're all treated equally. It makes sure that we get equal protection of the laws, and we all get due process of laws. It's all that. But what I want you to know right now is the 14th Amendment, because of how the Supreme Court has interpreted it, the 14th Amendment makes the Bill of Rights apply to the states and the local governments. All right? Because it says that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens. In other words, that not only the national government can't do this, can't take away your rights, but neither can the state or the local governments. That's called incorporation. It's a big deal. So that's your Bill of Rights, friends. What do you do next? Let's make some decisions. Here's your post for today. You're going to see your video right here because I'm working on it right now, but it's going to be posted up there. But what I want you to do are a couple things. Come up with some more what ifs out of any amendment between the 2nd and 10th Amendment. Anything. Come up with a couple and just post it on one of these boards. My example was, can you be, oops, get back here. My example was, can a person be fined $1 million for a small crime like shoplifting? Of course, the answer is no, because I already told you that. But think about it. Can you come up with some possible scenarios, some questions that you might want added or answered? Okay. And then I want you to go down here, put your name, put your class section right there, and then which of those amendments 2 through 10 do you think is the most important, and why? And which one do you think is the least important, and why? I'm interested. I want your opinion. I like your opinion. Okay. A couple games down here that you can play if you want to. And also, of course, you can look for examples of the Bill of Rights in the news for your Constitution articles. Make sure that you get at least one Constitutional Today article. You grab it and you summarize it and you post it on your on Google Classroom so that I can give you feedback so that I know that you know what you're doing. All right. All right, so we're going to take these, the rest of the amendments. We're going to have a good time with them in class on Friday and Monday. So everybody keep getting constitutional. Once we're done with the amendments, boom, baby, we're going to do some review, and then it's your big bar exam on October 17th. Can't wait. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be epic. You're going to love it.